Malaysia's ruling coalition retains power even as it reels from its worst ever electoral performance since independence. Just what are the causes of the setback, and will Malaysian politics ever be the same again? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Sami Zeidan. Malaysia's Prime Minister has been sworn back into office 2 days after his coalition suffered its worst election result in 50 years. Well, the ruling National Front saw its huge majority slashed, marking a drastic shift in Malaysian politics. Prime Minister Abdullah Ahmed Badawi took the oath at the National Palace in Kuala Lumpur amid calls for him to resign. His government won more than half the seats in Saturday's polls, but lost its two-thirds majority. That's the worst result for the National Front since Malaysian independence in 1957. Well, it comes against a backdrop of ethnic strife and tensions over poverty and crime. The shock result has also seen Malaysian share prices plunge. One former Prime Minister called for Badawi to keep an eye on public opinion and consider his options.
I think Malaysia are not up to it yet, but and I think he needs to consider stepping down.
Well, the results caught Badawi and the ruling coalition by surprise, but the factors behind the vote have been simmering for a while. See, the poor performance was due to income disparities, which some Malaysians put down to laws and government policies which favour the Malay majority. That contributes to ethnic tensions, which have been around for years. Violent crime in the country rose more than 10% last year, and it's been on the rise since Badawi came to power 4 years ago. And the cost of living is another problem. After more than a decade of low inflation, Malaysians have been hit hard by rising prices for food and household goods. And there's anger against ruling politicians, because while minority ethnic groups experience discrimination, their leaders continue to prosper. Well, joining us today, our guest in Kuala Lumpur, Mavis Buto Cherry, Senior Associate Fellow of the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies and co-editor of Democracy and Elections in Malaysia. Also in Kuala Lumpur, Tricia Yeo, Senior Research Analyst of the Centre for Public Policy Studies, and in Jakarta, columnist and author Karim Raslan. Well, I would like to start with Karim. Is Ahmed Badawi 100% responsible for this setback? What do you think?
Well, I think we have to be frank. The chief executive has to take responsibility for whatever happens under his watch. There is no doubt about that.
But some would say, so interrupt you, some would say that it's the power lords in the party that really have stopped him from making the sort of changes that he would like to make.
But then he has to be firmer on them, number one. Number two, as you said very astutely from the beginning, the country has a number of structural problems in terms of the NEP policy, in terms of the way that the distribution of the economic pie is handled. And these are all issues that are desperately in need of greater attention and greater reform. However, these are not issues that you can tackle overnight. They take time. And gathering the political will to tackle them has been the problem.
All right, that's a fair point.
On top of that, we have the racial problems.
All right, we will get more into the racial issues perhaps in part two, but let's focus on some of the political fallout from this election. If we go over to Mavis Buto Cherry, looking at what's happened and looking, I guess, towards the future, would you say that the ruling party is not going to be able to make the sort of constitutional changes, to wield the sort of power it once did in the parliament? Is that a good thing?
Well, I don't agree with Karim that, you know, the problem really is one of Dollah Badawi alone. I think the problems of Malaysia started during the time of the previous Prime Minister, and to some extent he's having to take the flak of a regime that has been authoritarian, that there has been corruption during the period of Mahathir regime, which was 22 years, and there was also a hollowing out of our democratic institutions, the judiciary, the civil service, the police, you know, and when we came to this, he actually inherited these problems. Now, in 4 years, it's not that easy for anyone to undo damage that has been done in, you know, over in the 1980s and 1990s. So I feel that to some extent he's having to take the blame for problems that had existed before. But at the same time, I would say that Dollah Badawi has not been very firm. He has to take the blame in two respects. First, he has not laid the blame on Mahathir. He has tried to carry on as if nothing has happened. And then when he has tried to bring about political and electoral reforms, again, he has not been very decisive. And to that extent, people had when he came into power, he came in with a landslide victory because it was assumed that he would rectify all these things, and he didn't.
So that's the
and
past.
So it was a great disappointment.
I think most Malaysians are having those sorts of second thoughts about his past performance, as you're expressing there. Let's look forward to the future, though. Is he in any better position now to make that change following the elections?
Well, I think that the BN and UMNO in particular has to review the situation. The power sharing formula that had been so successful in the past has come up with lots of problems. We have had a situation where the power sharing has not been very fair, that BN has got to reconsider this whole question of whether there should be one party dominating the coalition structure. And then again, there is this question of whether the parties in Sarawak and Sabah should be given a more prominent say in the running of the country. So I think there will be a lot of soul searching. I don't think that everything is lost. I think the power sharing arrangement is still a very good one, but it has to be reviewed. And it cannot be used to benefit the elite at the expense of the other sections of society.
Let's go over to Tricia Yeo from the Centre for Public Policy Studies and raise some of the many points you've opened there. Are we first of all, are we on the verge of witnessing Malaysia turn into a two-party political system?
I think what has happened in the elections is that it actually shows us the failure of the race-based power sharing model that was mentioned. And I actually disagree that it has been successful in the past. I think that even if we were going to review the relationships between the different political component parties, we're still going to see in the long run the same disintegration taking place. Now, the essential problem that we're looking at is that there is a politicization of race and religion. So as long as the parties are racially aligned, then each of the parties are going to continue to convince their electorate, their constituents, that we represent your voice. So the questions will always be along the lines of Malay rights, Chinese rights, and Indian rights, when the real question should be about socio-economic factors, the haves and the have-nots. Is the wealth from the nation actually flowing down to the bottom levels, the bottom rungs of society? So yes, in a way, to answer your question, I think that as the parties over the next few days convene emergency meetings, they will have to look at an option of actually forming one party within the Barisan Nasional, and one that does not have racial representation, but representation by principle, on principle of justice, on principle of equality. And on the other side, looking at the opposition, there's an option there, of course, for them to consolidate their objectives and their value systems and see whether they can come up with something formidable to the Barisan Nasional.
Isn't that supposed to be the idea of championing the cause of the have-nots? Isn't that supposed to be the driving force that has made the opposition do better in this election?
Yes, I think that's true, and I think that there has been a considerable opportunity now for a two-party system to develop. I think that we'll never be the same again. This is a historic moment, I think, in Malaysian history. The democratic process has changed in a way that it has never happened before, and the nature of the political system will now have to change with it. I do feel that that for the first time we have a viable alternative party and the makings of a two-party system.
Let's talk a little bit about the role of the media. If I could take the things to Tricia Yeo once again. Do you think that the media in Malaysia needs to do a little bit of soul searching here and ask whether it has really played a critical role, whether it's really looked at things outside of the traditional prism which you were explaining earlier?
We have to look at the owners of the media. The problem in Malaysia is that all the mainstream newspapers, radio and television are actually owned by huge media conglomerates, either influenced directly by the political party or by political individuals influencing them. The media needs to go back to the drawing board and understand what it really means when it talks about media freedom, basic principles of journalism, investigative journalism, things which we have not practiced in the recent years. In these elections, we see up to 70% of the media giving positive coverage to the Barisan National Government. And even when it did have exposure of the opposition parties, it was always skewed in a negative light, always talking about them in a certain way which would have inevitably influenced the voters in some sense. But of course, we need to look at alternative media, and that's where the internet has come in so prominently in these elections.
It has indeed. But Karim Raslan, looking at how the opposition, of course, have benefited from some of that new media, alternative media, where has Anwar Ibrahim been left in all of this? Were people really voting for the opposition, or were they really voting against the ruling party?
Well, I think Tricia brought up a very interesting point. The socio-economic angle of the protest vote is very important. People have suffered and they wanted to register that. And I think to a large extent it's also linked with the issue of the media. Because of the poor reporting of the sentiment of the ground, many people wanted to register a protest vote, not realizing actually that this protest vote would go so far as to topple state governments. So now I think there's a degree of shock in Kuala Lumpur at the extent to which the people have actually exercised their right. So those are 2 points. And then coming to Anwar, I think Anwar has been a big beneficiary and of course a very, very astute reader of the Malaysian psyche and how intense mainstream media coverage has actually acted as a negative factor for the government. He's used it very well.
All right, there's plenty more for us to talk about, but it is now time for a short break. When we come back, talk about the ethnic mix in Malaysia. We'll ask, did it have any impact on the election's outcome? Stay with us.